So, the options for difficulty in video games kinda suck. And this is a problem that seems like it's just getting worse. Now, I don't necessarily mean that games are too easy or too hard, but it seems like developers are scared to have a vision about how their game should be played and would rather you just figure it out on your own. Personally, I love hard games. I'm the kind of guy that thinks dying to Millennia 20 times in a row is a great way to unwind at the end of the day. And when I heard that 60% of Escape from Tarkov games have a cheater in them, my first thought was, good. Now I might finally have a real challenge. Oh god damn it!
In fact, to show you how dedicated I am to difficulty, I was willingly kidnapped and brought to, yeah, I'm not sure where they brought me. The point is, I am really into difficulty, but I can see why other people might not be.
In fact, I've heard that some people actually like having fun when playing video games. While I personally don't understand why you would want to play video games for entertainment purposes, I do respect the choice of people that want to play on easier difficulty levels. But now it seems like there's so many options for difficulty and ways to play the game that it feels like I'm never actually playing the game right. Sometimes games nowadays just get rid of difficulty options entirely and just ask you how you want to play the game. Now there is a difference between difficulty and accessibility. Creating a game that's accessible to people is very hard. And I respect developers that want to accommodate as many types of gamers as possible. But when it comes to actual in-game balancing, the difficulty part of the game, it seems like game developers have pretty much just given up.
In the beginning,
Back in the days before you could play Call of Duty on your phone, if you wanted to play video games, you had to go to an arcade. Arcade games were purposely designed to suck quarters out of the pockets of little Timmies that wandered in and wanted to get past the first level of Pac-Man. These games were notoriously hard because dying meant you had to put another quarter in, and a game that was really hard was a game that made a lot of money. And if you were one of those kids that was actually able to get a high score or beat an arcade game, you'd be the coolest kid around and everyone would give you high fives and a trophy made of asbestos or whatever the hell was going on in the 80s. But eventually though, technology advanced to the point where you could play games on your TV. And now, instead of watching the end of the Cold War, you could watch Mario stomp on Goombas. Most of the first home games were actually very short. And to justify the fact that it took mom over a month's worth of work at the puppet factory to buy you one, they were also incredibly hard. This meant that kids had to keep trying them over and over again, artificially lengthening the game. Eventually though, Timmy's little brother Jimmy wanted to play the games too, but he couldn't control his thumbs quite as well. So developers started making a variety of different games with different difficulty levels, and some games would even come with multiple options for difficulty settings. Of course, at that time, while they were trying to make games more accessible, developers also had to account for the fact that kids were really stupid. Mario creator Shigeru Miyamoto famously watched his son try and get up an unclimbable hill for 20 minutes in Mario 64, and is quoted as saying, "Of course games seemed harder when we were kids. Our brains were small and underdeveloped, and we hadn't eaten enough Flintstone vitamins to become a full human being yet." But because of dumb kids and experienced gamers, developers were now including multiple difficulty options for everybody.
Hello, my name is Magnus. I'm a hard man. Yeah.
Eventually, almost every single game included difficulty options to appeal to a wider audience, and the gold standard became easy, normal, hard. Oftentimes though, people playing would opt for the hard option, because playing on normal or easy made it seem like you weren't really undertaking the challenge of a game. It's at this point that I need to talk about condoms for a second. Please don't leave, I promise there's a point to this. When NASA was first sending men into space, they needed astronauts to wear condoms while they were peeing so the pee didn't just float away. The astronauts had to pick between the sizes small, medium, and large. Often though, the astronauts would not want to pick a smaller size and would pick a size that was too big for them, which would lead to them leaking pee everywhere. To help this, NASA renamed the sizes to large, gigantic, and humongous, so that nobody would have to feel bad about picking the small option. The exact same thing happened with gaming. People would purposely choose a higher difficulty level than they were actually comfortable with, simply because beating the game on normal or easy didn't seem like as much of an achievement. Some games even ended up adding a fourth, harder difficulty option for people that really wanted every bit of challenge they could get. Some prime examples would be Halo's Legendary difficulty and Call of Duty's Veteran difficulty.
Your fruit killing skills are remarkable.
Sometimes games had incredibly well thought out differences between the game's difficulty settings. For example, in the game Crisis, depending on the difficulty settings, the enemies would be more aware, they'd use different tactics, they'd communicate better, and they would even speak in Korean instead of English so you couldn't understand what they were doing. If only there was someone on Earth who could understand Korean. Most of the time, though, these difficulty levels were not incredibly well thought out adjustments to a game in order to increase the challenge. Most of the time, it was just enemy health up, enemy damage up, good job. And many times, the jump from the third to fourth difficulty options was insane. For example, in Call of Duty World at War, if you're playing on Hardened difficulty, it felt like the Nazis you were shooting just figured out how to use both hands at the same time. But if you go and bump it up one more difficulty to Veteran, it's more along the lines of, "Oh my god, holy shit, Jeremy's dead! How many fucking grenades do they have?" Certain games with multiple difficulty options will tell you specifically that one of them is how the game was meant to be played. Some examples of this is Halo's Heroic difficulty or Risk of Rain 2's Rainstorm difficulty. The developers specifically tell you that that difficulty is how the game is meant to be played, and if you go to a harder difficulty, you're playing on a challenge greater than what they intended when they made the game. Some games tried to be dynamic in their difficulty, attempting to change based on what the player was doing. For example, games like Half-Life and Left 4 Dead will dynamically adjust the amount of resources and enemies they throw at a player in order to give the players a break during rough patches. Other games, like Kingdom Hearts, will adjust the game's difficulty based on whether or not the player says they're afraid of the inevitability of aging. Don't talk to Kingdom Hearts. There's something wrong with that kid. Just let him release his Guitar Hero game or whatever the fuck he's doing right now. Eventually, though, game publishers realized that players would be willing to pay for an advantage in a video game as long as they felt like they were still winning.
Damn, what is that, bro?
For a long time, developers struggled to implement options in multiplayer games that allowed for a fair experience. There was always a chance that somebody on the enemy team was incredibly good at the game, and they would just absolutely dunk on your team. Some games implemented a ranking or elo system to allow players of similar skill levels to play together. Generally speaking, today, it's common to have two different playlists. One set for an unranked experience with a wider range of skills, and one with a strict ranking system that pits you against players of a similar skill type. There is, however, another option: pay to win. Now, you may make the argument that gaming has always been pay to win, as the very first arcade games gave you more lives as you paid more money. To that I say, shut the fuck up, Jacob. This is why nobody came to your birthday party. Nobody even likes Yu-Gi-Oh! Anymore. We talk about Pokemon now. Pay-to-win gameplay options have become a point of hot contention over the past few years. Almost every game now has some sort of battle pass system that allows you to unlock cosmetic upgrades for your character with no actual effect on the gameplay. But there are still absolutely games that outright give you an advantage if you just pay money. Star Wars Battlefront 2 famously rebuilt its entire item unlock system due to customer backlash over the fact that paying more money gave you a direct advantage over other players. And there are games with massive player bases today that will simply allow you to keep winning as long as you keep paying money. Even worse are single-player games that are pay to win. Games like the recent entries in the Assassin's Creed franchise will allow you to pay money to get better equipment and level up your skills faster. This is absolutely insane to me, as you are paying money to not play the game. Players that make these purchases, though, usually have a different view on difficulty. They view the difficult part as making the money in real life in order to make their entertainment easier. If we're talking about pay to win, we need to talk about mobile games. Mobile games seem to exist in this bizarre world where people have completely different ideas about what an accomplishment is. Almost every single game you can download for free on your phone is outright pay to win. You can buy more lives, special abilities, faster upgrades, anything you can think of, you can buy with a credit card. It's incredibly common to see mobile games with a bundle for $99.99 that provides you a variety of bonuses in the game. And everybody's just okay with it. Nobody ever feels like the game's poorly designed when they keep losing. They just pay $3.99 for more lives and go on with their day. Certain players called whales will drop thousands of dollars at a time on games that they enjoy. And when it comes to multiplayer games, this means you aren't hoping that your team is more skilled than the other team. This means that you're hoping that your team has a better 401k account than the other team. At one point, I got really into the game Rise of Civilizations. I joined a clan, and when we were fighting with other clans, it wasn't about which one of us had the better strategy. It was about which one of our leaders was more willing to just pour money into the game, spending it on relocating their base and upgrading their armies, while the rest of us in the clan watched these psychopaths pay hundreds of dollars at a time. It almost feels wrong to talk about mobile games, as it seems like they exist so far outside of the rest of gaming. But realistically, mobile games make way more money than console and PC games do, by a lot, and the business practices there leach into the rest of the gaming market. Mobile games are meant to be as accessible and addictive as possible in order to gain as many players as possible. This gives the best chance that one of those players is going to drop thousands of dollars on the game.
I want to go shopping in the Eaton Center. Why are you locked? Why are you closing your doors? Why are you locking your doors to the public? Why? Tell us the reason.
As I said earlier, games have become continually more accessible to a wide range of people. And I think at its core, accessibility is a really good thing, allowing options for people to experience games that they otherwise would not have been able to play. As controversial as the game was, The Last of Us 2 had some of the best accessibility options I've ever seen. Whether you were bad at gaming or dealing with a disability, their game had some wonderful options to allow anybody to smoothly experience the game. But sometimes it feels that the developers are so focused on making their game accessible to as many people as possible that they lose track of the original experience they were trying to get across. Let's take a look at Assassin's Creed Valhalla. This game also has some wonderful accessibility options. However, they seem to almost come at the detriment of the game. Assassin's Creed was originally a stealthy assassination game where you snuck up on people and stabbed them. It seems pretty simple to me. However, the franchise has recently gone in a more RPG-like direction, with gear score, levels, and damage numbers. In Assassin's Creed Valhalla, if you try and assassinate somebody that's too high of a level, they won't die in one hit. At least that's what I thought. But at one point, the game creates a little pop-up that says, if you would like to kill enemies in one hit, just go ahead and turn that on in the options menu. And sure enough, in the options menu, you can decide if you always want to kill enemies in one hit. But that's not all. You can adjust basically every single statistic regarding difficulty. How much health do you want? How much damage do you think you should do? How much damage should the enemies do? Do you want the map to be pre-discovered for you? How far do you want the enemies to be able to see? How many milliseconds should you have to be able to deflect an attack? What the fuck? Why the fuck am I balancing your game for you? Why am I making decisions about core gameplay mechanics? At the point that the player is deciding how good the eyesight of your enemies are, you fucked up. Go back and start over. Obviously something went wrong during game development and you need to try again. This doesn't make it seem like you wanted the game to be accessible. This feels like you couldn't decide on what you wanted the game to be, so you were just like, fuck it, let him pick. If I'm going into a game and I'm given so much control that I can choose how many enemies I want to fight and how many rewards I'm getting, why the fuck am I playing your game? I can just go into Gary's mod and be an assassin there. And there are plenty of sandbox games that are out there that do things like this, but that's the entire point of those games. Yes, those exact same things can come up in games like Dwarf Fortress or Factorio, but those games were meant to be played like that. They are sandbox games. They are a sandbox that you play in. They are meant to be fine-tuned exactly how you want the world to be, and then you can just play around in the sandbox. These sandbox games are not about pre-written characters and stories. A sandbox game and a story-driven game should be two very different experiences. A lot of developers nowadays seem so terrified that somebody might not like their game that it seems like they lost any sense of artistic direction. Video games are an incredibly unique art form, where a person or a team of people is intending you to have an experience that you interact with and have challenges that you overcome. When game difficulty is left entirely in the hands of the player, it feels as if that experience has been dumbed down. It doesn't seem like the game developers are trying to add meaningful choice or accessibility to the players. It seems like they're desperate for as many people to play their game as possible so they can make as much money as possible. I don't think it's too much of a coincidence that the games that have this massive problem with difficulty also tend to be the games that have loads of microtransactions and pay-to-win mechanics. And even though, yes, I know it's a meme to say this at this point, but I think this is why games like Dark Souls are held in such high regard. Dark Souls is unapologetically hard. Thousands of people stop playing the game within the first few hours simply because of how hard it is. But for the development team at FromSoft, that was the entire point. They wanted to make an incredibly challenging and frustrating experience, and they weren't afraid of turning people away. Maybe there should be an easier mode or accessibility options for people that legitimately have trouble playing the game. But if FromSoft were ever to add a mode like that, I feel like they would still try and stay true to the artistic integrity and purpose behind the game. And I guess that's the main point I wanted to make. I love games as an art form, but every piece of art does not need to be made for every person. There are plenty of games that I don't like and are not accessible to me, but that does not mean I can't appreciate the artistic intent behind them. I want as many people as possible to experience and share in my hobby without developers having to try and compromise their games in order to try and appeal to everybody. Because as you know, if you try to make everybody happy, no one will be. Thanks for listening to this insane person ramble on about things that don't matter. If you liked this video, go ahead and hit that like button, or subscribe if you want to.